Hi there. My name is Andrew Watts, and my goal is to write a complete novel in only 30 days. What the hell am I doing? Hey there, all you groovy guys and gals. It's Andrew Watts. I'm back. I'm better. Uh, and I managed to have a pretty full day, day 7. I started out by going to work, and then I came home and I voted. And I hope the rest of you did too. And without turning this into any kind of slanted party political broadcast, I hope you voted intelligently, and by that I mean changing the status quo. And then after that, I came up to my studio and I wrote a couple of grand worth of words, which I'm pretty proud about. I'm still under where I should be. I'm only at 6,000 and whatever that is. Should be roughly in the 10,000 area or more. But as I've said before, I'm not going to let it get me down. Some days are better than others. I'm back. I'm better than before. And so now I'm going to read some more from the book. And the last part that I left off was still in chapter 2, I believe, at the beginning of chapter 2. So we're going to pick up from there. This is Young Heart. Rachel suddenly stopped and looked back into the dark distance, wondering how far she had come. She must have walked at least a mile. She couldn't see the bug, of course, not that she expected to. Oddly, the further away she got from her car, the more uncomfortable she felt, as though the bug were a safe haven on this wet, frigid night, and she was slowly becoming more and more separated from the sanctuary it provided. It was silly to feel that way, she knew, because in reality her quirky little car was more like a sinking ship that she had been forced to abandon. Really, she was adrift at sea, and it wasn't too difficult to imagine the inky night around her as a vast, empty ocean. An ocean here and there illuminated by the headlights of passing cars, and by the light of one that screamed by, she caught the reflective glint of a blue informational sign. She increased her pace, hoping it meant there was an exit soon, but the sign merely informed her of a scenic overlook a mile ahead. She remembered the overlook, a view of Mount Tom in the distance and the Connecticut Valley between, a sight she had seen 100 times before on her way to and from class. Rachel wondered if there might be a telephone there, and the thought of a telephone and possible shelter from the rain lightened her heart and sped her gait. There was a telephone. That is to say, there was a telephone box, but no receiver, which had been torn off, the cord dangling by its side, as useless as a maimed arm. Rachel cursed and ran to a covered gazebo nearby to duck out of the miserable rain that by now had soaked every inch of her. She rubbed her arms under her jacket to try and create some warmth, and stared off at Mount Tom jutting up dark purple against a slightly less purple sky. Between her and the mountain, a white church steeple rose up from the rain-gray wooded folds of some sleepy town a couple of miles away. She wished she could walk straight there to find a phone, but the town was a precipitous drop and several miles away on the other side of a low fence at the edge of the overlook. Rachel knew she must hit the road again, but she was loath to step back into the rain. She had barely an ounce of fat on her body and was sure she would freeze to death before she ever reached a phone. She had always felt the cold keenly, certainly more than Jeff, who was a furnace next to her in bed. Her sweater and rain slicker provided only the barest of protection, and Rachel mentally slapped herself again at her stupidity for leaving the house so ill-prepared. She hoped Jeff wouldn't be too angry with her. He would be sitting on the couch now, watching the 11 o'clock news as he usually did before going to bed, checking his watch and wondering where in the hell she was. Jeff had little patience for Rachel's absent-mindedness. Forgetting to fill up the gas tank was exactly the kind of thing Jeff would rail at her about, and she didn't really blame him. She hated herself in these moments. She felt weak and dependent, and certainly not like her father's daughter. No, not like Jackson Tillett at all. Dad. She tried to picture him now. This seemed to be more difficult to do as the years ticked away. He had always been so completely concrete before, a presence not easily discharged, and yet now she strained to describe his face in her mind. Impression, she thought. Forget detail. Concentrate on light, on color. Large swath of pink, surrounded by brown and gray. Wild ringlets of gray and brown, hairy and pink. Red, round stubble of Van Dyke brown, alizarin crimson smashed with titanium white and ivory black. Black Jack, Black Jackson Tillich, black-eyed, brown and gray-haired, red-faced Jack Tillett, Dad. Rachel laughed at the exhilaration of it all. It was like a ride, probably as close to an extreme sport as she was ever likely to get. And her father would have loved it, though he would perhaps have been hurt that it took some stranger at a university to get her to convert. Jack Tillett had tried to encourage the chaotic in his daughter's artistic vision from the beginning, ever since he'd given Rachel her first set of watercolors at the age of 4. But until recently, Rachel had always been too much like her mother, a realist to the core. Was it because she had always been not a little afraid of her wildly exuberant father, who seemed to contain too much life, too much explosive energy within his large and powerful frame? Rachel stepped back out into the rain and walked to the highway, noticing that there weren't many cars out at this time of night. Somehow it made her feel more lonely and wretched. She was shivering uncontrollably too, and that alarmed her. She didn't know much about hypothermia and wondered how long it might take to experience it and under what conditions. She thought it might not be cold enough, it certainly wasn't below freezing, because otherwise the rain would have turned to snow. But she wasn't sure. Rachel limped along the highway, feeling utterly miserable and exhausted. After about 200 yards, she was just beginning to wonder if perhaps she should flag down a car when a black automobile zoomed by and stabbed its brake lights. The car stopped in the middle of the highway and seemed to hesitate. Finally, it creeped onto the shoulder and switched to reverse and then began to back up toward her. This filled Rachel with a sudden dread, and she stopped walking. She was completely vulnerable out here alone, and there was nothing she could do about it. She began to shake again, and wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from apprehension. As the car crunched backwards toward her over the gravel shoulder, she felt in the pockets of her coat, and her hand closed around her house keys. All right, she thought. That'll have to do. Rachel had once taken a women's defense class in college, and one of the techniques they taught was to use anything you could find as a weapon. Keys could gouge eye sockets. Pencils could stab. Those, plus a kick to the groin and the heel of the palm to the nose, might be the only defense a woman would have in an attack. The point was to fight back, though Rachel had often thought that, depending on the situation, fighting back might be the absolute wrong thing to do. Fighting back might get you killed. Still, she kept her hand around her keys as the car backed toward her and crunched to a stop a few feet in front of her where she stood shivering. The automobile was black and shiny new, with a chrome Mercedes-Benz logo on the trunk. Rachel stayed where she was behind it, and, as if sensing her dread, the driver merely rolled down the window and stuck his head out. "Are you all right?" he said in a deep voice.